Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about the Alemanni, a group of ancient people who helped shape early European history. So who were they? The Alemanni, also called Alemanni, were a mix of Germanic tribes who lived near the Upper Rhine River a really long time ago. The first time we hear about them in history is from a Roman writer named Cassius Dio, who mentioned them around the year 213 CE during Emperor Caracalla's military campaign. These tribes were tough and bold. By around 260 CE, they took over a Roman area called the Agri Decumats and moved into what we now know as Alsace and northern Switzerland. Because of them, the Old High German language began spreading across that region, and by the 700s, people started calling it Alemannia. In 496, their freedom came to an end when a Frankish leader named Clovis defeated them and made their land part of his growing kingdom. At that time, the Alemanni still followed old pagan religions, but over the next 100 years, they slowly became Christians. The rules and customs they lived by were written down in something called the Lex Alemannorum. For a while, the Franks didn't really control them that much. Local nobles still had a lot of power. That changed after a rebellion led by Duke Theudebald. A Frankish ruler named Carloman stopped the revolt, punished the Alemanni leaders, and put his own trusted dukes in charge. Later on, when the big Frankish Empire started to fall apart, Alemannic leaders became more independent again, and power struggles broke out, especially with the church leaders from Constance. One powerful noble, Burchard II, even created what became known as the Duchy of Swabia. A few years later, in 919, a ruler named Henry the Fowler officially recognized it, and Swabia became one of the main regions of the Holy Roman Empire. Even today, the areas where the Alemanni once lived still show their influence. Their old dialects are still spoken in parts of Germany like Swabia and Baden, in the French region of Alsace, in German-speaking Switzerland, in Liechtenstein, and even in Austria's Vorarlberg. The French word for Germany, Allemagne, actually comes from their name, and that same root appears in lots of other languages too, like Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, and Turkish. The name Alemanni itself is really interesting. Ancient writers like Gaius Asinius Quadratus said it means all men, showing that they were a group made up of many smaller tribes working together. The Romans and Greeks used this name to describe them as a mixed group. Many historians, including Edward Gibbon, agreed with this idea. Some people later thought the name might come from a word meaning sanctuary, but most experts still stick with the all men explanation. But here's something cool. Not everyone called them the Alemanni. In the 800s, a monk named Walafrid Strabo wrote that only outsiders used that name. The people themselves preferred to call themselves the Suebi. Over time, scholars argued about where the name came from, and some wild ideas appeared, like one theory saying it came from Hebrew. But by the 1500s, a thinker named Beatus Rhenanus showed that it originally referred only to a smaller group before becoming a general name for Germanic peoples. Back in Roman times, the Alemanni weren't mentioned at all until the 3rd century. A famous historian named Tacitus, who wrote about many Germanic tribes around 90 AD, didn't mention them, which means they probably hadn't formed as a group yet. The first time they clearly appear is when Cassius Dio wrote about Emperor Caracalla's battles against them. Dio described how the Alemanni asked Caracalla for help, but instead he took over their land and killed their warriors. Later, when Caracalla got sick, people said the Alemanni had cursed him, and in anger, he attacked them again. After winning, his soldiers got the honorary title, Germanica. Even though Roman writers called them barbarians, evidence shows the Alemanni weren't as wild as they seemed. They actually lived in Roman-style houses, used Roman tools, and even wore Roman clothes. Alemannic women started wearing Roman tunics before the men did. The Alemanni and Rome kept clashing for centuries. In the late 200s, they invaded parts of France and northern Italy, taking advantage of Rome's weak defenses. Their raids were brutal. They burned temples, destroyed towns, and killed many people. Roman writers later blamed a lot of the destruction in Gaul on the Alemanni, but Rome struck back. Emperor Gallienus stopped them from taking Italy, and later Emperor Claudius Gothicus defeated them at the Battle of Lake Benacus. Their biggest defeat came in 357, in the Battle of Argentoratum, that's modern-day Strasbourg, where Roman general Julian, who later became emperor, captured their king Cannatomarius. Still, the Alemanni didn't give up. In 366, they crossed the frozen Rhine River again, but were beaten by Emperor Valentinian. Finally, in 406, they crossed the Rhine one last time and settled for good in Alsace and parts of Switzerland. By then they had become part of the new medieval world that was forming after the fall of Rome. And the Alemanni didn't just disappear, their lands and people kept changing hands and rulers. Their kingdom between Strasbourg and Augsburg lasted until 496, when the Frankish king Clovis beat them at the Battle of Tolbiac. After that loss, they briefly looked for protection under Theodoric the Great of the Ostrogoths, but after Theodoric died, the Franks came back and brought the Alemanni under Frankish control again in 536. From then on, the Alemanni were usually ruled by a Frankish duke. A big and brutal moment came in 746, when a Frankish leader named Carloman ended a revolt by having many Alemannic nobles executed at a place called the Blood Court at Cannstatt. For about 100 years after that, Frankish dukes ran the area. Later, the Treaty of Verdun in 843 made Alemannia part of the Eastern Kingdom of Louis the German, a territory that would eventually help form the Holy Roman Empire. The Duchy of Alemannia lasted in some form until 1268. The Alemanni left a strong cultural mark, especially in language. The way people speak in parts of southern Germany, Switzerland, Alsace, Liechtenstein, and Vorarlberg comes from Alemannic German. Some of the earliest Old High German writing we have comes from runic inscriptions like the Pfordzen Buckle. Linguists think big sound changes, called the High German consonant shift, started around the 5th century in places like Alemannia, or where the Lombards lived. Before that shift, their language wasn't very different from other West Germanic speech. Over time, Alemannia lost its separate legal identity when leaders like Charles Martel folded it into the Frankish Empire in the early 8th century. Today, Alemannic is mainly a linguistic label for the group of Southern German dialects and the Swiss and Alsatian ways of speaking. Politically, the Alemanni organized themselves in small districts called pagi, along the east side of the Rhine. These pagi often paired up and formed larger groups that worked like kingdoms. Ancient writers used a lot of words for their rulers, from paramount kings to petty kings, which might mean there was a loose ranking or just confusing overlap. Around 357, there were 2 top leaders who seemed to have led the whole confederation, and several smaller kings who governed tiny areas. Below the rulers were nobles and warriors. The warriors included professional groups and also regular free men called up to fight. On average, a nobleman could raise about 50 fighters. Religious life changed a lot during these centuries. In the 6th century, the Alemanni were mostly pagan, worshipping trees, rivers, hills, and making animal sacrifices. By the 8th century, most of them were Christian. The 7th century was a mixture of old pagan ideas and new Christian beliefs. Some elite members might have been Arian Christians earlier on, but the main shift was slow and often peaceful. Missionaries like Columbanus and his follower St. Gall worked in the region. For example, Columbanus disrupted a local beer sacrifice to the god Woden. Runes were common for a while. From about the 520s to the 620s, there are many runic inscriptions on jewelry and buckles. As Christianity spread, the use of runes fell away. Some runic pieces show pagan names for gods, and others, like a fibula from Bad Ems, dated between 660 and 690. Mix Christian signs with runic writing, which shows the change was happening. The bishopric of Constance was set up by the early 600s and was active by 635, helping spread the church in newly converted lands. By the early 700s, laws such as Lantfrid's Lex Alemannorum included special chapters about church matters, which shows how the church had become an important part of everyday law and life.